Hi everyone. Today we're going to talk about the immigration consequences with a criminal conviction. This is Christina Williams with Just Criminal Law.
And David Mann, legal storytelling specialist. Okay, so immigration consequences for criminal convictions. Would that apply to any type of criminal conviction?
No, not any type of criminal conviction, but we're looking at, violent felonies or crimes that involved moral turpitude. That is, they grossly deviate from the community's norms of what's acceptable. And that's kind of an abstract definition, but those are the types of crimes that have immigration consequences.
So what's an example of some of that type of crime?
Well, if you have any crime that involves a child or, for example, a family violence crime or a gun crime. Also, you've got some your major drug offenses, and then the violent felonies that you would expect, like murder or kidnapping, things like this.
Okay, so you're saying, in addition to it being a crime, as it would be for anyone who commits some of those crimes, if immigration is part of your life, it could affect that. So who gets to decide if this type of a crime applies to having potential consequences for immigration?
There's an immigration court, and that's going to be separate from the court you go in front of for the crime. It's, the criminal court is going to take place in the county and the state where the crime is alleged to have happened. The immigration court is not necessarily in that same town or even that same state.
Okay, so that's sort of there's fewer of those around, and so you probably have to travel somewhere to go to that immigration court?
Correct.
Okay, so what types of consequences would we be talking about here for immigration?
Well, if it's a crime like we spoke about above, and you're charged and convicted, then you face what's called, or it triggers deportation. And so that's where, you're forced out of the country and not allowed to come back in. And a lot of times, that process that you were going through to become a citizen is halted, and you're not allowed to do that anymore.
All right, so have you had a client where this happened to them?
Yes, I've had several clients that were, maybe permanent residents, or they were just in the process of becoming legal, and they were charged with a crime. And, in those types of instances, we really need to let the prosecutor know what we're looking at, that we need a plea deal that will allow them to stay in the country, not trigger deportation, because this is called a collateral consequence. That is, some other person facing the exact same charge is not going to be devastated by being deported because of the criminal conviction. And so, it's part of the plea negotiation process, but if we're not able to come to an agreement, then we have to take the case to trial and try to get an acquittal or a not guilty verdict.
Now, I imagine that there are some lawyers who wouldn't necessarily understand all of this. So what happens if someone ends up with a lawyer like that?
Sure, there's the seminal case on point, which is from 2010, and it's Padilla. And in that case, there was a Vietnam veteran who was a permanent resident in the United States and was charged with a drug trafficking offense and was advised by his attorney that it would not affect his immigration status. And so he pled guilty. And sure enough, there was the collateral consequence that it was triggering deportation for this person. Now, fortunately enough, he caught that is, Mr. Padilla caught that he was not represented well, that is, his attorney was in fact found ineffective, and he only had 30 days to catch that mistake. Fortunately, he did, and he appealed the conviction, and the Supreme Court addressed this issue. And then, it just became very well known by defense attorneys. And so, anytime you have a client that's not a citizen, you always have to take into consideration these collateral consequences.
Okay, so you got to know about that 30-day window to get the thing appealed, right?
Right. In that particular case, that was important. Every now and then, still, these types of things happen where say a defense attorney does not know that the client is not a citizen. I had a client who was from South Africa, and I represented her on a matter, a revocation matter for a felony she was convicted of. And, I'm not certain what kind of advisal she had when she pled to that felony, but, that just at talking to her face to face, I had no idea that she was not a U.S. citizen. And so, it still happens, even though we've got this very well-known case. There are still instances where, people are not advised of this.
So having an informed lawyer is sort of the key here. So how might they get in touch with you?
Sure, we'll include a link in the description where they can call, text, or chat with a member of my team anytime, day or night. Here at Just Criminal Law, we know you only get one shot at justice, so make yours count.